was bright, lit up with nowhere to go, to and fro, the pendulum throw.
I'll talk! Who the hell are you?
The United States of America.
You're building a weapon.
It's called an atomic chain reaction.
There is a spy.
You are in a world of trouble, from sea to shining sea.
I'll bet you overhear all kinds of secrets.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talks at Google. Today is my pleasure to welcome David Ellison, Dana Goldberg, Sam Shaw, and Marcy Ross from Manhattan and Skydance Productions. Thank you guys for joining us today. So I would love to know, this is to Sam, what made you go, I want to make a show about making the atomic bomb?
First of all, thanks for having us. It's great to be here. But that's actually not what I set out to do. This is a creative process that I would not recommend to anyone. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I sat down to write something about a totally different war in a different decade. I was writing what I thought was going to be, and also, by the way, not a TV show. So I basically struck out in every possible way. I thought I was going to write a feature about the war on terror set in the present, and about people who are involved in matters of national security and secret work, and what the implications are for them in their personal lives. And in the process of doing what I was sort of trained to do as a journalist, which is what I did before I wrote for television, which is that I just buried myself in research, what I began to discover is if you're sort of interested in questions of national security and this sort of towering secrecy edifice that is at the heart of so much of our sort of political conversation these days, you find that all roads lead back to the New Mexico desert. And that really the story of the birth of the bomb is kind of the story of the birth of 21st century America and the world that we're living in now. So I went down a very, very, very deep rabbit hole, and I'm still down there somewhere now, 6 or 7 years later.
Hidden away in the desert.
I am.
So at what point did this come to Skydance, though? At what point did you go, okay, you know what, it is going to be a television show, it's going to be set in this time, in this era, who's going to help me make it?
So I wrote a draft, I revised it, I wrote about 20 drafts, and finally it became the thing it was sort of going to be, and I partnered up with my sort of partner in crime creatively, Tommy Schlamme, our executive producer and director, who is very well known in television, won about 1 million Emmys for The West Wing, principally, is what he's known for. And then we went looking for some congenial partners who would help us get this thing made. And first of all, it's an incredibly ambitious and complicated show to make, period, full stop. But particularly on television, particularly on basic cable. And so finding people who had the right creative sensibilities, who loved this subject matter and loved the story as much as we did, I mean, it was sort of a miracle that we wound up with the folks on this stage. And so we sat down together, I guess, probably about, 2.5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was this very refreshing thing where it was really just a few people in a room, and we talked passionately about the subject matter, and by the end of the meeting we said, let's go make a TV show. And we did.
Was there anything scary to you guys about the scope of this television show? It's a period piece, it's about a very tough time in U.S. history.
Dana, please.
Not really. I mean, to be honest, a credit to Sam and as he said, Tommy, we read the script and we just loved it. I mean, we thought it was beautiful. And as he said, we all got in a room together and we felt like we really found people who so understood the subject matter and the beauty of the script, and for us, the beauty of the show is, yes, you have this incredible historical backdrop, but it was really about the characters. And, to this day, we always say one of the first things that Sam said to us is, yes, it's a show about Los Alamos, and yes, it's about the people who built the bomb. It's really a show about secrets and lies. And it's about the secrets and lies that, yes, the government can tell scientists, but it's really about the lies between husbands and wives and families and what the ramifications of those lies are. So we felt incredibly comfortable in that room.
And I just want to add, it's also about timing, because the landscape has changed so much in the television business. So it was a perfect timing between incredible material, broad, hugely ambitious subject matter and scope, but the television business was able, there was a network there that was able to support it and was not afraid of it. And I think a few years ago, people would have definitely been afraid of it.
I think you make an excellent point, and one of the things that I loved about the show, and I think that we here at Google especially can relate to, is it's this kind of isolation where you're working on something that you can't talk about, and you're maybe surrounded by a bunch of other really smart people, but those are the only ones you can talk to about it. And there's competition, and there's personalities, and there's all sorts of that. But they're working with a very technical subject matter. How do you make that relatable for audiences? Is that where the character part comes in, or?
Well, it is actually, in a way. Before the job that I had immediately before I got the chance to make the show that I'd been hoping to make for all these years was working on the Showtime show Masters of Sex, which is also a show, oddly, they kind of share some DNA. It's also a show about science, and it's about the kind of collision between science and the culture and ethics. But we had this sort of rule of thumb on that show, which is that sex could never exist on Masters of Sex just for sex's sake. Although, by the way, sex is probably more obvious, as a sort of sales pitch to a network than nuclear physics is, right? But the deal was it always had to be a vehicle for character storytelling. So to the extent that a sex scene could sort of help us to come to understand what made these characters tick or sort of dramatize some essential conflict, then it belonged on the show. It wasn't there to titillate. Now, I don't know how many people are titillated by nuclear physics. I happen to find it really, really, really fascinating, I must say, as a non-physicist. I'm not a scientist, but I've come to be really fascinated by the science. But for us, it was sort of the same rule. There is a lot of science in our show, but our challenge, and it's sort of the gift of the subject matter, is to find ways to let science be an engine for deep character storytelling, to let it reveal things about our characters that we didn't know. And we're sort of constantly trying to find new ways to do that.
You mentioned the science of it. Did you guys bring in consultants for it? I assume you did a bunch of historical research on this.
We just made it all up. No, we didn't. We have a few. I was going to say an army. It's a small army. We have a few incredibly smart and really, really heroically patient consultants who work with us. Now, all the writers on our show, we love the research and we love the subject matter, but we get stuff wrong, and it's an incredibly specific set of talents you have to have as a consultant to understand what the sort of story needs are that are at the heart of a question. And so we have a physicist at UCLA named David Saltzberg, who's incredible, and there's a nuclear historian named Alex Wellerstein who writes exclusively about issues of secrecy and the atomic bomb and does it really brilliantly. So he helps keep us honest, too.
It's really fun when John always talks about having to familiarize himself with the math and the science, and he was a complete math nerd in high school, and how this has made him feel so much smarter.
Yeah, the thing that John Benjamin Hickey, who plays Frank on our show, likes to say is that before he started the show, he called up some buddies who work on Big Bang Theory, and he was like, "You got to give me some tips. Like, what do I?" And they said, "Always make sure that they give you the last couple numbers of the equation. That they just tell you what those are, and they say like action, and you just write them in, and you look very, very smart." He does it very well.
He does. How do you strike a balance between sort of incorporating the obviously real world events and characters? Like you can't have a show about the atomic bomb without Oppenheimer. How do you kind of strike a balance between that and then exploring this universe that you guys have also created? Because it's a fictionalization of history that we're familiar with.
Yeah. Well, there's two things. One is that I was sort of amazed by it actually for such an incredibly important moment in our history, sort of like I think it is an origin story, and it really has a lot to say about who we became. For such an important moment, actually I think a lay audience doesn't really know a lot about it. And that was the first thing that was exciting to me about the story, is that I knew a bit about the science, but I did not know that there's this town that was built almost overnight in the desert, on top of a dead volcano, surrounded by barbed wire fences, and all of these incredibly brilliant people, the greatest geniuses on the planet, came together to build this weapon. But we were just talking about this morning. They brought their families, and they were kids. And when they're kids, you need schools, and you need teachers to teach those kids at schools, and you need grocers, and you need contractors to build the buildings. So there's this huge kind of teeming community that cropped up overnight. And only the tiniest minority, a tiny percentage of the less than 10% of the people living in this place had any idea what the purpose of the town was. So that was this incredibly riveting thing to me. But that was what really captured me, was the sort of that emotional dynamic, what it is to, try to lead a life in this place. And what it suggested was that we needed to tell a story really about fictional characters set against the backdrop of this historical moment so that we would have the freedom to kind of explore their interior lives in the way that we wanted to. Now, of course, Oppenheimer pops up from time to time as mostly in the first season as this kind of Olympian god who, his shadow is cast over the events. He plays more of a role in the second season. But for the most part, what we try to do is use the history as kind of a stage on which the dramas of these fictional characters are played out.
And the stage of the town, my understanding is it's a big set. It's could you guys talk about sort of the commitment to?
Yeah.
Please, Sam.
You want to?
Well, here's what I'll say.
It's an extraordinary experience. It's sort of like being on the Google campus where it's all encompassing. When you visit the set, and basically Sam and Tommy created this environment that, if it's raining, our actors will be wet, just as they were wet and muddy as they were tromping through, the town back in the 40s. So there's a level of immersion and reality that's kind of extraordinary. When you visit, the ashtrays have the exact brand, stubs of cigarettes. You open up the drawers, everything is accurate and such a deep level. It's sort of extraordinary.
No, it's nuts, and it's so antithetical to the way that TV usually gets made. Usually just because of the budgets and these incredibly punishing schedules, we have to make these episodes so quickly. So usually you're on a soundstage and you're shooting on stages and the lighting is really controlled. But Tommy, had the audacity to think that the way to make this show feel the way that we wanted it to feel, all of us, was to sort of do what the Army did, which is that we built a town. And we were lucky enough to find this 11-acre compound of 1940s buildings in Santa Fe that we got use of, and we rehabbed it. And so it is like colonial Williamsburg, except instead of churning butter, you go and you invent the apocalypse. So.
There's something that I found interesting that's, I feel like there's actually more diversity in the show than there would have been in the actual town, and the internet sometimes led me to also maybe back that up, but I like seeing the diversity, and I like seeing, this representation of also these characters who were very marginalized in in the history books, where it's like, yeah, there are people of all shapes, colors, whatever, contributing to these projects, and yet we don't get to see them. Was that something you knew from the beginning that you wanted to incorporate so you could kind of explore those issues, or was that something that came along as you were sort of developing it?
Well, quite honestly, it was a challenge. That is a really tricky question when you're dealing with the historical time, because well, look, we're interested in the fact that anti-Semitism is part of the conversation of our show. I mean, look at what was happening in Europe, and that was sort of the pretext for this race to build a bomb. And so it was important for that to be part of a conversation, in spite of the fact that a lot of the physicists in this place were expatriate European Jews, But we were somewhat constrained because it was largely a pretty white community of scientists there, but that wasn't entirely the case, So we have tried to find ways to bring in as diverse a kind of ensemble of voices as we can in the show, and that's part of what's exciting to us. I mean, and in writing about women at Los Alamos and the experience of female physicists and the experience of brilliant women who are wives who were excluded from the secret, those are the kind of people who I think usually are left on the margins of stories about the Manhattan Project and about this moment in history. And so it was interesting to us to try to find a way to make those voices part of the discussion.
And just from a personal point of view, I had my grandmother worked on the Manhattan Project, not in Los Alamos, but so it's nice
that's
to
amazing.
See. It's very nice to see kind of not her exact work, but her contribution rewarded in a way. It's like something that maybe only my family would have known about,
right.
But now it's like, oh no, look, there were ladies there. There were people of color. There were all these sorts of different characters contributing to history. Like America's a melting pot. So I appreciate that personally as an audience member, seeing this kind of representation. And you bring up a great point about the women, where I love that there are these two very hyper-intelligent, strong women who are trapped in a time era that isn't necessarily welcoming of that. And one of them is in a position of being included to a degree, being a contributing member on the project. And then this other character who's just kind of trapped and sort of being punished for her intelligence. So I'd love to know, is that something that you discovered as you develop the characters, or was it something like ahead of time you saw these situations and went, this is how I'm going to represent the two kind of ends of that spectrum?
Well, it is a spectrum, and it sort of evolves in the second season. One thing that was interesting but also constraining for us in the first season is that a few of our principal characters, Liza, played by Olivia Williams, Abby, played by Rachel Brosnahan, they are at a structural disadvantage in our storytelling because they don't know, they're not able to penetrate to the nucleus of this secret, and that means that they can't put their hands on the sort of central drama that is a spine around which the show is built. That changes in the second season in some ways that I don't want to say too much about because I think it's sort of exciting storytelling, but it sort of activates them as characters in the story in a really exciting way. But yeah, absolutely, we were interested in writing about that and exploring those questions. I mean, there is something fascinating to me about the fact that this moment, World War II, actually created opportunities for women that hadn't existed before, some of which went away when the war ended. And so that was a thing that, and Katja Herbers plays Helen in our show, she sort of talks about that, is that in an odd way, although she's working to end this incredibly catastrophic war, she's sort of aware of the fact, this bittersweet fact, which is that it's sort of like, the chariot turns back into a pumpkin as soon as that war ends, in a way, for her.
I'd love to talk about season 2 because I've cheated. I've seen a little bit of it, and it definitely feels very intense. Like it feels like the stakes have been raised. Obviously, the real life stakes were being raised. We're getting closer and closer to real life events that they needed to get this bomb built for. But was it sort of a conscious decision going into season 2 to be like, okay, let's really turn up the heat. We've established this world. We've established these characters, or was it more based on the timeline of where they were in the real world?
I mean, I'll start because it's hard. It's really difficult to speak about the show sitting next to Sam because no one talks about the show as well as Sam does. But from our perspective, looking at it, what season 2 really feels like 10 chapters of incredibly wild thriller. So to me, it's sort of like the span of it is it takes place over 15 months, and how do you put that much story in 10 episodes? It's kind of extraordinary how they did it so that, it's like that, it's so unexpected to have this kind of thrill ride when you actually know the ending, but you still are biting your nails thinking, how are they going to solve this? Or how, what's the outcome going to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that was our sort of goal, in a way, was we all felt that by the end of the first season, the storytelling has hit this kind of breakneck pace, and every event has huge ramifications for everybody in the world of the show. There's a sense that the people who come out the other end of this experience are not going to be exactly the people who went into it in the beginning. And what we didn't want to do was sort of take our foot off the gas and slow down and rebuild and have 4 or 5 seasons of exposition to sort of set up stories. And partially that just wouldn't have felt honest given the subject matter. They're kind of careening toward this event and it's coming. And in a way, it just felt important to us to have the storytelling just accelerate as well. So that's sort of, that's kind of what this second season is. We sort of throw the characters through the windshield of the story.
I have to ask, for those of you at the studio, is it one of those scary moments when you're like, this show has to have an end theoretically? Like, it's great, it's successful, but there is a real world event that ends it? Or is the idea just sort of let it organically kind of play out?
No, I think one of the things that was really remarkable when we first got involved with the show was, I mean, as Dana said earlier, Sam had written a script which we all fell in love with. But when we were fortunate enough to partner with Sam and actually took the show to the network, Sam knew what all 5 seasons were before we started shooting a frame of episode 1. And I think what is really interesting is the bomb dropping. There's so much in the history of Los Alamos that happened even after those events actually occurred, that there is so much history and texture to explore. And what Sam has done brilliantly, much like, if you think about, something like Titanic, which was a huge phenomenon, everyone knew that the boat sank at the end of it, but you're riveted by the character stories that are taking place. And I think really the familial stories that Sam has told in the show are riveting and beautiful and incredibly exciting to watch on a weekly basis that keep you wanting to come back despite the event that you might be hurling yourself towards.
Yeah, I will also say too that just because it would seem like a story that has an obvious conclusion, we sort of are brushing up against this, but it would seem like a story that has an obvious end point. But the truth is, the trick up the sleeve narratively to me has always been that while it appears to be a show about the end of World War II, it's really a show about the beginning of the atomic age that followed it. And so for me, from my standpoint, actually the most exciting and interesting story material takes place after this war has ended, and Los Alamos remained this center for weapons development for decades afterward. Still is. But that great moral clarity of World War II was gone, and so it's sort of that moment where we enter this Cold War arms race instead, and what that means for people who have been party to this act of violence, for good or for ill. That's a really exciting part of the story to us.
I'd love to know, without any spoilers, what's the topic that you're all most excited that we get to explore in season 2?
For me, it's always about the characters. And I think there's not one character that ends up at the end of season 2 that anyone will have seen coming. So I really don't want to give anything away, but I think too, what Sam did so brilliantly is the notion of how we reintroduce Frank Winters at the end. It's such a cliffhanger what happened to him, and it's very unconventional how we start the season and then the sort of slow reveal of who Frank is. And I think the journey he's on this season, he and Charlie, it's kind of an extraordinary melding and mixing and coming out on the other side. If that's not too vague, but
it's a little vague.
It's a lot vague because I'm staring at it.
But you're presenting the audience. You're not spoiling it.
Look, it's just sort of building on what Marcy was saying. It's funny talking about this at Google because one thing that's been interesting to us in writing the show is it is very much a show about work and the culture of work and what it is when you're sort of in an enclosed environment with really, really, really smart people working on the same project. And I can analogize in my own small way to the experience of working on a show in a writer's room. But there's a moment where you get sort of lost in the fog of the work. And I think that was very much the experience of a lot of people who worked on the bomb. So the thing to me that is most exciting about this second season, besides the fact that we've talked about an atomic bomb for a while and we might actually get to see one this year, is the journey that John Benjamin Hickey takes Frank on over the course of this season, which is from being the person who's in a way the most dogged, Ahab-like, proponent of the idea that we have to build this bomb and end this war, and a guy who has compartmentalized and repressed a lot of misgivings and self-doubt in order to deliver that weapon. He goes through a set of circumstances that fundamentally changes his relationship to this thing that he's helped midwife into the world. And I think that generates some really, really exciting and powerful character storytelling. And John, I have to say, is just completely extraordinary in it this season, as all of our cast members are.
Yeah, what Sam just said.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say for me, again, going back to the very first thing Sam ever said about this project, is it's the ramifications of those secrets and those lies. You specifically pointed out the female characters who, in season 1, obviously don't really necessarily have the knowledge of what's going on in Los Alamos. And for me in season 2, it's fascinating because with knowledge comes power, but in this case also can come a great burden. And what happens when people who don't really know what's going on there find out, and how it affects them on both a very personal level and then how it changes their characters. Because again, suddenly you know something you didn't know before and you know the ramifications, and everything changes as a result. And I think the way Sam and the writers have written that this season is just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, really, again, it's dovetailing off of it. It really is the character journeys that that our ensemble goes through this season. And one of the relationships that I've always loved is the Frank and Charlie relationship. And obviously those characters in season 1 take incredible turns in terms of where the relationship begins and where the relationship ultimately ends. And I think that in season 2, without wanting to give anything away, Sam has really dialed that into a whole new level, and it's really, really exciting, and we can't wait for people to see it.
Great.
Can I just add one more thing that I think is so significant? What Sam has done is the story is told in a less linear fashion than it was in season 1. So you really are leaning in. So I think that's it's just really a fascinating device of storytelling.
I'm sort of curious to know, because Skydance has done all these huge, amazing, big blockbustery ones, and then now you guys have these 2 very successful shows, and one is this historical grounded though, and the other one is on Netflix. And so what prompted you guys to go like, you know what, these are our 2. This is when we're going to TV.
It was really when we first set out to start the television division of the company, we wanted to do a show that we felt like could be the calling card and the identity for the company. So much about what you do first defines you in entertainment, and much akin to when we did True Grit with the Coen brothers as our first movie. We wanted it to be something that, first and foremost, everybody here loved, but that we believe could achieve if we all did our jobs collectively right, hopefully a level of both commercial and critical success, which is always such a hard thing, and to find something that really rises to those 2 occasions. And Manhattan was the first script that we read that all of us absolutely fell in love with. Dana actually read it first and called me and said, "You have to read this," and read it immediately. And and then all of us collectively looked at each other and said, "We have to get this made," and got in a room with Sam and with Tommy, and we were fortunate enough that they decided to trust us to help get this show out into the world. And we found terrific partners at Lionsgate, and then at WGN, where everybody shared the same passion for this story. And we're very thankful to now be heading into season 2.
Great. I should say one of the things for us at Skydance, whether you're talking about features and whether it's a big budget, sci-fi fantasy movie, or you're talking about, a historical drama, it all goes back to the story. It really is just, do we love this story? Do we love these characters? And do we love the possibilities of where they could go? Then combined with, is the story in the right hands? So Manhattan, it was an obvious yes across the board as a result of that. Because to be able to spend time with these characters in this incredible backdrop, for us, was a no-brainer.
Marcy, I want to go back to a point that you made earlier that I love, that you talked about the sort of changing television landscape. And I feel like, with all the respect, like a show that's hyper intelligent and about science and all that stuff.
Didn't stand a chance.
Not necessarily going to stand a chance, but it's great that you guys have found a home for it. And also, again, Grace and Frankie on Netflix, so you guys have really embraced this sort of divergence of like trusting your audience. Are there other projects that you guys are excited to sort of work on with that, or are you sort of incubating these babies right now?
No, I have to say this is an amazing time for television. I've been in the business, in the conventional television business, for over 20 years. So for me to look out at the Wild West, and there's 57 places to sell content, and there's so many different ways to communicate your specific vision for a show, or to have a writer like Sam or Marta Kaufman, or we're working with some other fantastic writers, and basically sit with them and say, what do you want to do? Don't think about where you want to sell it. Don't think about what the potential of it is in terms of a business, but just you do it, and you do it as best and with the most integrity that you can, and we will find a home for it. You never used to be able to program that way. So it's creative drives everything right now, and that is incredibly liberating.
As an audience member, that's always nice to hear.
No, it's kind of wonderful.
I think my last question for you guys would be, if you were living on the Hill, what job would you have liked to have?
Ooh. Oh, that's a very tricky question. Wow. What job would I have liked to have? Well, I got to tell you, Abby Isaacs.
Mine.
I'm sorry, but I got to say, I was going to say the job I would be tempted to take would be her job, which it was the case in this place. All phone calls and all letters were censored, and so all phone calls were eavesdropped upon. So one of our characters actually sits in that room and listens to phone calls all day. It's like those are her radio soap operas or the interior lives of other people she knows. And I also know it would be the worst job for me possibly to have because I would hear things that I just, and also I'm absolutely, completely constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret, so I would be like the last person to have that job. But
Marcy.
Oh, he took the one.
You took the obvious
There's
job.
an entire bank full of
All right,
people
guys.
doing that job. You could ask for the same one.
I know.
We could all work together, guys.
Gosh, I think I'd want to be the spy. Is that weird?
I think
I want to be Meeks. I want to be Meeks and be the spy.
Dana, any preference on?
Well, I was going to go with Abby's job because you're the one person who, if you want to get it, can get all the information and not have to do anything with it. I'm going to go with, he may not be the nicest character in the world necessarily, but William Peterson plays a character named Darrow this season on the show, and he's the opposite end of the spectrum. What do you do if you have all of the information? And you're the guy that everybody's looking at, and you have a very clear point of view, and you think you're right. I'm not saying I would want to necessarily be him, but I might want to have his job.
You're kind of scaring me, Dana.
I'd want to be a scientist there. I mean, I grew up computer programming when I was 13, and took kind of pre-med and physics class for fun throughout college. And so, to be affiliated to kind of the cutting edge of technology is something that I would have found fascinating.
Wonderful.
Which job would you want?
Ooh, that's tough. I think I'd want to be one of the boss jobs,
Yeah. There you go. Why not?
Or not Oppenheimer's responsibilities, but that job wouldn't be bad. Well, we have a moment for audience questions if anyone has one. I know there's at least one.
I'll pick one up on the mic. Could you describe some of the side elements of creating the show? Like, for example, the music, the costuming. There's like a mix between sort of Icelandic post-rock with Jonesy and Alex, and then just the period songs. Like, how do you create that balance and mixture?
Yeah. Well, this is a conversation that it sort of started as a conversation between me and Tommy Schlamme, our director, about what the show should feel like, and what should it look like, what should it feel like. This was sort of the moment, I'd been a huge fan of his, I was a huge fan of The West Wing, but it was a moment when I understood that we were going to have a really great partnership working on Manhattan together, which is that we both really responded to just this, there's something a little unsettling and fundamentally strange and Twilight Zone-like about the subject matter itself. The Hill was this sort of odd, secret suburb, and it became really important for us to find a way to tell a story about this moment, this moment in the Second World War, but not to fall into all the kind of conventional tropes of World War II storytelling, because we know what those feel like. There are, incredible movies, and there's been incredible TV. Band of Brothers is incredible as a World War II story, but that's not what this story was. This is sort of a true life science fiction story. So we were so lucky when Jonesy and Alex came on to compose the score for us in the first season. That was sort of, that's sort of like a metonymy for the whole thing for us, which is that these guys who in some ways were a crazy choice. Jonesy is the front man of the Icelandic rock band Sigur Rós, and their music is this sort of ambient, eerie, sometimes electronic music. And there was just something really fruitful and exciting to us about the mix between that sound and then these great, period needle. You hear the radio, and it's, hear Carmen Miranda on the radio, and what's not to like?
And it also just is, it's the timelessness of the piece and the subject matter. It's not just rooted in that one event.
Well, that's absolutely right. Look, this is a very important thing to us, is that we see this as an incredibly contemporary story. It starts in 1943, we're up to 1945 by the end of this second season, but I think it has a real mirror to hold up to this contemporary moment we're living in right now. And so just the aesthetic of the show, how we shoot it, what the visual reference points were, what it sounds like, it was really important that we sort of lift it out of a box of feeling like it's some sort of powdered wig period drama, but it sort of is a little harder to pin down than that.
And I guess one other question. So now that as you're entering into season 2, the reception for the show has gotten bigger. I see that there's reviews and recaps in Scientific American. Like, what's been sort of the reception among sort of history buffs, historical enthusiasts, or people whose relatives worked on the Hill? Are they Are they clamoring for lectures?
It's
how's it going?
it's been really, really gratifying. I will say when we first started the show out of the gates, I think we were the only TV show. There's a sort of a culture now online of doing weekly reviews of episodes of TV. I'm not sure there's another show on the air that was getting weekly recaps written by Scientific American, as you say, and Popular Mechanics. But that seemed like a really, really pretty cool punk rock kind of thing to be a show that was getting weekly reviews by Popular Mechanics. But the truth is, scientists in the science community has been incredibly supportive of the show and really welcoming. I know there's like a regular Tuesday night pizza party at some bar in Los Alamos where people watch the show and talk about it. I have not gone. As I say, I can't watch the show with other people. I'm too much of a hermit. Can't watch people watch the show. But no, it's been really gratifying.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to season 2.
Thanks for having us.
So much for having us.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you.